indie game garden.
Willy Picard, aka Bushmonkey, is a hobbyist developer of free detective mystery games, but that doesn't quite do him or his interactive experiences justice. Inspired by games like Type Help, Return of the Obra Dinn, The Case of the Golden Idol, and Immortality, Will meticulously crafts experiences that challenge players to make deductive leaps that feel meaningful while not being overly obtuse. Will manages to keep this tenuous balance going throughout hours-long experiences full of beautiful art, competent writing, and thrilling detective work. As an enjoyer of Will's genre of choice in particular, I have only played 2 or 3 games that I can think of that I would say measure up to his level of craftsmanship and obvious grassroots love for detective fiction. What's more, Will chooses to provide his games to audiences for free. It's a genuine joy to have him on the show today. Will, thank you so much for being here. It's an honor to have you. To start, I'd love to hear more about how you got into game development. And it's rare that I have someone on the show whose focus is, I mean, you tell me if your focus is broader than this, but it seems like your development process is very much based around these kind of deduction, investigative style games. So I just want to hear why detective games in particular and kind of what called to you about the hobby.
Yeah, sure, no worries. So basically, I've been making games for fun since like the early 2000s. But I've been making always my first love is narrative game. I just like telling a good story first and foremost.
Yeah.
But I also don't want to be writing just visual novels. I actually want to have some gameplay. So I used to make adventure games, like point and click adventure games, back in the days of a Adventure Game Studio, if you ever heard of it. So I used to do that in the early 2000s. And I enjoyed making those, but they were quite a lot of work, and so I would dip in and out and never really complete any project. I started loads of projects, never finished them. And then I came across the detective mystery kind of genre, between Obra Dinn and then Golden Idol, and then finally Type Help and the Root Trees. There's been a lot of games lately that have been driving forward. Well, very much puzzle games, but with a very strong narrative element. And that really drew me in, like actually be able to still create very much a narrative, very much a story game, have some gameplay to it, but not be as complicated as building an entire point-and-click adventure game with all the animations, all the elements that transpire with it. So being able to tell a story quite straightforward, and let's be honest, actually being able to complete a project by it not being too complicated. So Type Help really inspired me to try and say, I could take my vision of writing stories and just making a little puzzle around how you interact with a story, as you bring the story together, just includes within the narrative itself. And that really clicked with me.
Yeah. Well, it definitely has paid off. The games are wonderful. And before we get too far into kind of the nitty gritty of how you make them and more about the games themselves, I would love to hear more about your philosophy behind making this very, you say it's easier than Adventure Game Studio. It's still like very carefully crafted. And I know how much work goes into even making a very, very short, much less complicated than your games, like Twine style game. So why do you make these games free? What's important to you about kind of the hobbyist side of game dev? And why is that a part of the philosophy?
So I think when I first started, I was saying in the 2000s, the indie game scene was very different. You couldn't really bring your personal project games easily to an audience for people to pay for. You didn't have the ability to get things onto Steam easily. There was no itch.io at the time. So people used to make really big pet projects and just share them for the passion of sharing them, because they weren't going to make any money out of it, and they just created games for the passion of making the game. And I used to do that, and I've still had a passion about just sharing what I love making and just enjoying seeing people play what I make and enjoy it and just get the gratification of somebody enjoying my work. And that philosophy kind of stuck with me for the last 20 or so years of just wanted to just make the games for the fun of making a game myself, and just getting the enjoyment of seeing other people enjoy my craft.
That's awesome. Do you mainly see people interacting with your game through like comments on the pages and like Steam reviews? Do you also see any like Let's Plays out there that you've enjoyed?
So the key thing that I found was that I started making my first game in December, What I Went to the Crew, and I just released it onto HIO and just didn't really market it, didn't really do anything with it, and didn't expect anybody to play it. I just made it, had a couple of friends play it, they enjoyed it, put it up on the itch. And then a few weeks later, I got a message on Blue Sky from somebody go, "Oh, we've got a community on Discord. We're really loving your game, and we'd love to get you to make some changes because there's some parts are a bit hard, a bit obscure." And I went in, and it was a Rotary Discord, and suddenly there was a big audience there of other like-minded people who love that kind of story games. And I realized there's lots of people who are playing and enjoying those. So I started getting more to Discord. I wasn't really a Discord person before, but I built a Discord for my games as well. There's quite a small community there of like-minded, passionate people who love those kind of games. So that's been really great. On the flip side, it's all been within that kind of niche detective games community. As far as the Let's Plays and all that, there's not been many. I think I can count, on my hands the number of actual Let's Play there is of my games, and I've enjoyed watching every single one of them. But it's not really hit that kind of mainstream media or anybody wants to actually play it outside of China. In China, it's really big. There's loads of videos on Bilibili of people playing them. But it's hit that audience quite well. But on the Western side, on Twitch or on YouTube, not so much. But the few that did do Let's Plays, because there's only the few that have done it, they've got quite a few views.
Yeah, that's cool. And I saw that the Red Pearls of Borneo has a fan-made Chinese translation, which is really cool. If you wouldn't mind talking me through how were you approached to were you approached about that project? Was it through Discord in this small community?
Yeah, it was through Discord. It was one passionate fan who asked if she could translate. So I helped her, give her the files for her to translate. And at first it was obviously very AI-driven kind of a translation, so I didn't really want to put it officially in the game. So the first step was we created a separate itch version of the game just for the Chinese fan translation. And from there, we kind of iterated. I worked with them to make it less AI and more personal and walk through the text. And then we had that grew quite a big following, and another translator came along. Somebody who actually writes and translates officially in China, but was also a fan as a gamer. She decided to come and help. And between the two of them, they've done a really good job of translating it. To the point when if you go on Red Note and look at the people reviews, they rave about the translation, and there's little elements which obviously I don't understand because it's Chinese, but they go, "Oh, see how they wrote this is so interesting. The way they did this, that's so well written, etc." So they've done a really good job of translating that.
Yeah, and I think that process is kind of a case study or a representation of how a small passionate fan community can make big impacts, not only in giving you more fuel for the fire of making games, but also sharing the game with a whole new community. That's beautiful. I was wondering what you do for your day job. I know you can't say specifics, but if you wouldn't mind sharing with us kind of the general vague version of the answer, it'd be interesting, sure. I think, to hear.
So I've always been in tech for the last 20 or so years. I started at first, in finance departments and working on creating data for banking, for insurance, etc. But over the last 10 years, I've actually moved into the gaming industry and now work within the mobile gaming industry. But I've moved away from the actual coding quite a while ago. So it's been fun to actually go back into the actual deep part of coding by making my own games on the side.
Yeah, very cool. I like how you're reconnecting with that initial interest. What engine do you use to create your games, and how does working within that engine of choice influence the design? Because your games, the two I've played, have a very kind of intentional, somewhat sparse at times design. So I was wondering if the engine influenced that, or if that was mainly your kind of spin on it.
So I chose the engine especially because of that feel. For the last few years, I've been using Godot as my main engine, and I made quite a few games, quite a few prototypes, which I never went that far. But when I decided to make those games, the first thing I noticed is that really it's it's just clicking through buttons, and it's just a pretty wallpaper on top. So he said instead of using Godot for those, I would just create websites. So it's literally just plain JavaScript and HTML.
Oh, okay.
But the more I went deeper into creating, especially Red Pearl, as Red Pearl scaled bigger and bigger, it became harder and harder to maintain the JavaScript. So for the sequel, I'm going to be moving back to Godot because it's going to have, it became kind of unwieldy, especially when it came to them releasing to Steam. I found it was so much more of a problem. If it had been built in Godot, it would have been 2-button click and it would have been on Steam. But trying to get a website and push it through Steam was a bit hard, yes.
Yeah, that's interesting too, that like you have gone back and forth between Godot, which is obviously this very established open source engine, and just kind of making a pared down version for your own needs, and how each have their own unique pros and cons. As far as, you know, Godot, it's way easier to publish because that's what it's for, but it's probably easier to keep track of everything that's going on when you're just kind of making this spare, more website version. But I'm sure you can, I mean, you tell me if this is right, but will you be carrying learnings forward from like the interface of Red Pearls into the Godot version of the next game?
100%. I've already been looking at it. I've been looking at what I've done with Red Pearls and seeing how I could fit into Godot. It's not going to be too difficult. A lot of the learnings around how the data is handled and how you represent those data sets and those texts and those narratives and those events in order to display them. And I know that will say the same. I can literally just transport that over. It'd be more around the interfaces and being able to have more better ways of doing UI and animations. And because right now for the demo of the sequel, I'm still going to be doing it in the same Red Pearls engine because I want to try and get it out in time for Steamfest. I will not have time to convert it over. But I've been trying to do more animations on it and trying to do the kind of animation I want to do in a game. But as a website, it's very hard coded, very hacky.
Yeah, I bet. Cool. Well, that's awesome that you're able to combine kind of the design ethos of Red Pearls with allowing for more updated animations and hopefully easier exporting and all that. Well, the two games I've played of yours are What Happened to the Crew and The Red Pearls of Borneo. We've talked a little bit about the development process of Red Pearls. I was also wondering, like, do you do everything for your games? The art, music, design? We know you do coding and execution. Do you have help? And what's the process of going from idea to actually starting to build these games out?
Yeah, so for help, I do everything myself apart from music. I do not do music, which is weird coming from my family background because my dad plays music and my family is very music oriented, but I'm not. So that's the only thing I don't touch. But everything else is my own. It's my own art, my own design, my own coding. For the Red Pearls of Borneo, you'll have seen in the credits music, there's a guitar playing in the background. That's my 14-year-old son playing the end music. As far as the actual design itself, it's very interesting because for What Happened to the Crew, it was literally at play type help. I loved it so much. I said, I want to play more, and there was nothing else like it. So I just started coding. I didn't even plan it. I just went through, starting writing, and as I was writing and coding, I was throwing more and more at it, and throwing everything at 6 I didn't really ever think about what I was making and what the end goal would be. It just kind of took shape in front of me as I was making it, and I didn't really intend for it to be seen by anybody, myself and my friends. But I was quite proud of what I achieved in the end, even though it started out of nowhere. I think even to go to the point where there's a couple of secrets or a twist at the end of the game, which were not meant to be there. I was just building the game and I thought, actually, that would be really interesting. And I just, at the last second, added this twist and added these extra things at the end, which were never planned. I just felt my way through that game. When it came to Red Pearls, that was very different. I properly started designing. I had this idea for a long time. I've been building loads of narrative games in the past, and I always came back to this mood. It's not so much the story narrative of Red Pearls, but the mood of that era. So in 1920s to 40s in Malaysia, it was so interesting how you had the colonies, you had the opium trade, you had the pirates, then you had the World War II invasion, all the different forces interfacing, interacting. I've always really liked that kind of mood there, and I really wanted to try and do something with that kind of setting. And a detective mystery game really lended itself really well to that, and I think it was also quite a unique setting for that sort of game as well.
Yeah, it definitely does lend a unique setting. That kind of inspires me to ask the next question about how do you go about historical research for your writing and game design process, and where does your obvious love of history fit into choosing, these kind of deductive style games?
So it's funny. It's not even about real life history. I'm a massive comic book nerd, but maybe from my accent, I'm French originally, so especially French graphic novels. And when I grew up, there was loads and loads of like historical graphic novels, and there's one in particular I always say has been an inspiration for this about called Theodore Poussin, and it's about a man from Belgium who goes on travel in Malaysia and goes into all sorts of adventures in the 1930s. And that was kind of the starting point, and a lot of the historical point I've learned was from that. But there would only be like snippets within this. So then I went to the snippets and then went on Google, YouTube, Wiki. There's a really good Facebook group as well on people who lived in Borneo, who have family who lived in Borneo before, and sharing photos and sharing stories and stuff. So a lot of things is taken from that. A couple of the portraits in the game are actually portraits taken from photos of people who would share those photos from the family members who lived there.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I've always been really interested in how fiction can be such a powerful tool as long as it's written and researched, correctly and responsibly. Historical fiction can be such a powerful tool to learn about the past that doesn't feel as dry. So I definitely connect with that.
What I would say as well is I always feel a lot of people will do stories like even in the present or the past and don't do research. They just rely on their knowledge based upon existing media, and all they do is amplify tropes.
Right.
And I hate that. I really like when you can tell when somebody has actually spent the time to go into the research. And what you end up doing is, as soon as you start doing the research, you end up finding some interesting things that you didn't know about, which actually can drive the story or like help your narrative and add extra layers to your story that you wouldn't have had if you just relied on the existing tropes.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that gets all the more important the, smaller scale you go, right? Where it's like way harder to, take the extra hour or hours to like dive deeply into a topic instead of having a big team. But it's all the more important, right? Because it's media that people love, and they might, like you said, amplifying tropes isn't helping anyone. It's at a completely different scale, but I'm currently reading a book called Red Dead's History, a video game, and it's an obsession in America's violent past. And it's by a historian, kind of not talking about how accurate or how not accurate the Red Dead games are, but kind of going through and discussing exactly what you're talking about, which parts actually happened, what kind of is related to actual American history, and what is just amplifying tropes. And I think that was so well said. The Red Pearls of Borneo includes nearly, we'll say about 10 hours of content, depending on how fast players deduce the game's secrets. And that's a huge game, a huge undertaking. How do you approach your first steps into creating a mystery game on this scale? I know you said it was way more planned out than its predecessor, but it must be so much storyboarding, linking together beats from that larger narrative. Or am I wrong? What's the process?
Yeah, no, you're right, but it's very much two-step, right? The first step is a lot of research, and then figuring out the major beats. And then it's also what I like to concentrate on is the characters. So instead of trying to map out the entire story or anything like that, it's mapping out the main beats, but then coming up with interesting characters and interesting relationships. And then trust the process. Because once you have that, as you start writing, your characters come to life and they will lead their own ways for your story as well. So as long as you got your main beats, you know where you're trying to go. How you get there, the journey you get there, it's not that well defined. You trust your characters, you trust your process, and you work for it, and you find some good voice. Because once you have, if you try to plan before you get the voice of the characters, it's hard for me at least. Once I have the voice of my characters, the voice of relationship, start making them talk to each other. It's a bit like playing when you're a kid with your toys, and as you getting to play and getting to like work with those characters, you understand the motivation, you understand how they would react and how they would behave, and that kind of drives your story forward.
That's such great advice. I feel like it's one thing to have ideas. A lot of us have ideas, but it's way easier said than done, I think, to trust yourself, over a development process, over a writing process, and trust the characters, like you said. But once you find the voice and just letting them talk to each other, I think it's such it's a way that I think could inspire a lot of creative flow in someone listening who might want to write a similar story. So I appreciate those words. The games I've seen you mention as direct influences for your style of design, Type Help, Return of the Obra Dinn, The Case of the Golden Idol, and Immortality, each handle the deductive leaps they challenge players to make differently. How do you go about kind of centering these inspirations and kind of capturing their spirit without emulating them too directly?
Well, I'd say that with What Happened to the Crew, I emulated Type Help way too directly. But I think with Red Pearl, I kind of like learned from that and started to like think more around how to make it fun and interesting, but also not too complex, because it would be easy to like add system upon system upon systems. But then it just becomes a chore as opposed to fun. So I concentrated on like two very defining things, like still having the Type Help, choosing the characters, putting them in a location, and focusing on that, but trying to implement a slick GUI on top. But also trying to add an extra one or two dimensions on top, and like the item piece where you could find echoes of stories, which I think in the first half of the game I didn't use as much as I would have liked, which is why in the so-called DLC I spent far more time in trying to figure out with puzzles to use those items better. Those items were then, despite them not being used too much in puzzles, they were great for people to like know. Oh, I know where the character is going, and follow it through the items and start deducing things, and it helps smooth out the deduction process without being totally blocked. Which and what's interesting is that when people used it, but used it in a way that was felt with the way they were playing, it was very smooth, worked really well with them. It was very much a give and take on it, and it was very pleasing. But some players can't help themselves and end up brute forcing, and then they hate the system because, it's too easy to brute force. So there's a balance between giving everybody the tools to make it enjoyable, but then trusting the player to not abuse the tools and make it less fun for themselves by using it.
Yeah, that must have been a kind of iterative testing process. Was it mainly I'm thinking about the freshness of the focus system in Red Pearls. As you said, it must have taken some give and take to get it dialed in. Was it mainly you playing prototypes? Did you share it with your family, or maybe the friends you had kind of made the other game for? What was the testing process like?
Yeah, so after What Happened to the Crew, I started to get quite some fans. So when I went Red Pearls, I asked the fans who wanted to play it. I had a Discord for playtesting. So I got playtested by quite a few people, about 20 or so. I got some good feedback, but the main feedback was still when I released it to the wild. I put it onto itch, and there was still a lot of early spikes of difficulty, or like people not understanding how it worked. So I think the first couple of weeks of it being on itch, I made loads of new versions to try and like smooth it down even further. And by the time we got onto Steam, I think I kind of like perfected that, and the Steam version was as clean as it could be. But I still iterated on that and added some more things, like I did an extra system, the global timeline, so you could see at a glance the entire set of people and where they are at all times, which some people really enjoy, being able to like complete that as like a fidget spreadsheet. So it was nice to like iterate on it and tweak and add. But the key main part of the focus system was really owned while it was on itch. So by the time it hit Steam, it was as good as it could be.
Yeah, yeah. That, I mean, you can tell. I having played the version that's up on Steam now, like you can tell it's gone through that process of iteration. And in it, the kind of main character is kind of this supernatural psychic detective, and but there is this, as we've discussed earlier in the interview, there is this very well researched kind of historical accuracy going on in the story, and I guess like does that combination of kind of the psychic with historical accuracy, do you think that is mainly the influence of your interest in these comics? Is that kind of your sweet spot as far as an artistic perspective of your own? What does that kind of confluence of the more supernatural and the kind of historical fiction element represent?
To me, it was just a bit of a conceit of a. I know they were going to be building a narrative timeline and seeing what people have seen in the past, but if you do it historically, there's no such thing as security cameras or anything like that. So, I had to come up with something to kind of like bridge that barrier, and I could have made it an omnipresent kind of person with no real connection, like in the Golden Idol, you don't really ever play a character.
Right.
It's just a thing. I think I always like having a character, even as you play. I'm not one who believes in the whole you embrace the player. The player character should be a vessel. I don't believe that. I like my main character to be a character. Yeah, I think the whole kind of medium psychic thing really helped just as a conceit bring the player on a journey and be able to bridge that gap of how the hell can we see what they're seeing when there's no cameras then.
Yeah, well, I think it's super successful. And what happened to the crew obviously kind of kickstarted this community that you've discussed. But Red Pearls has gotten like, it seems like a much bigger fan response as your community has grown and as folks have kind of started to find your games more. Were you expecting kind of this growth with the bigger game? What's kind of your reaction to what, frankly, I see as like an outpouring of love and support for the game on itch and Steam?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't expect any of this. I just wanted to make a game I would be proud of, and I was really proud of both my games, but especially Red Pearls. I just couldn't believe the amount of love is garnered. What's really interesting, obviously, is like, in the West, over in Europe and in America, is a small niche community, but everybody who's still got a lot of outpouring of love. But once it hit China, it went from CCU peak of like 30 to 40 on Steam to like 2,000.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
it's now been played by over 100,000 players.
Wow.
But it's got a 98% positive review on Steam, which is just incredible. I couldn't ask for anything more. It's just,
Yeah.
it's beyond my wildest dreams. It's fantastic.
It's a huge accomplishment. Congratulations. And Green Mist Over Portland is the sequel to Red Pearls of Borneo. We've already discussed a little bit what you're going to be kind of building into Green Mist and what you're learning from Red Pearls. What are you most excited to share with your audience when it comes to this follow-up effort?
So what I've tried to do is with Red Pearls, very much type help formula of the narrative mystery piece. But I was always interested as well in trying to bring in the document searching part of something like a root tree or a rat line
Right.
to the whole investigation. So Green Mist Over Portland is going to be a two-side story. You'd be able to play as Delphine, still going through the past and uncovering what's happened in the previous timeline, as I said, during the Cold War. But as you uncover clues in the past, you can then switch to Cynthia, who's a MI5 agent in the present, and she can go and use those clues to go for archives from MI6 to try and uncover more clues. Can go and interrogate suspects, and then can bring those clues back to Delphine, who can then go in the past and can also maybe even say, "Oh, the person interrogating was lying to you," because I could see what happened, and so I'm quite interested in like seeing what I could do as a puzzle as far as a dichotomy between exploring the past and then seeing how the present works with it.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think it represents a couple of the strands we've talked about. One, in how you're kind of taking bits and pieces from each of these inspiration games and making something new, but then also how you have this fascination kind of with timelines and history, but it sounds like it's going to be a mix of both. So that's really exciting. Maybe this has changed over kind of your development process here from game to game, but do you envision an audience when you're designing games? Or especially since you take this hobbyist route, do you mainly make them for yourself and to fulfill that creative drive within you?
Yeah, I think I'd like to make it for myself because what people have been enjoying is the stories I've been wanting to write. So if I try to pander to my audience, I think it would lose what makes the stories mine, right? And I think there's a couple of things where I like to play with my audience a bit, and there's things that people are now, penning as Bushmonkeyisms, where I add things in there that are frustrating to players, but I just thought it would be funny. Like in Red Pearls, you've got Bones Room that serves no purpose, and everybody thinks, what the hell's going on with Bone Drummers? There's nothing there. Or in What Happened to the Crew, having the last word in Wordle be a nonsensical word, just to really frustrate the players. It's my style, and I think if I try to paint to the audience, people that complain about it, or they complain about the Red Pill endings, the choice. Everybody wants a perfect ending. I did not give him a perfect ending on purpose. I like the idea of there's no such thing as a perfect ending. I didn't want everybody's happy. You have to make a choice. There's going to be somebody who's going to lose out, and loads of people didn't like that, and complain about it. But at the same time, I think it keeps the conversation going, and I think it made it interesting. It wasn't a forgettable ending. Which is what I'm aiming for. So I do listen to feedback when it comes to things that I think, oh yeah, maybe they're right, but I'm not going to do things just because the audience say they would like it that way. I think at the end of the day, they want my stories, so I'll keep telling you.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the major benefits of having them be, hobbyist projects instead of commercial, is that they really are your stories, and you don't have to, worry about making sure that they hit a certain number of people's expectations, which is beautiful. If you could give some advice to an aspiring game designer, what would it be?
I would say that if you want to make mystery games, which is my forte, my niche now, I would always say don't spend too much time worrying about the puzzles. Write the stories first, get the narratives on first, and then you can get the puzzles to come organically. If you make a puzzle first, it becomes far less interesting as a player. It just becomes a tick box of or Sudokus or Tetris levels. But the organic play between narrative and puzzles is what makes those games really interesting.
That's great advice. Very concise and super well said. Well, Willy, thank you so much for joining me for this interview. I've learned a lot. I'm sure my listeners have too. And just you taking the time means the world. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's been really good.
And that was Willy. I've called him Will. I've called him Willy. I think his real name's Willy, but he goes by Bushmonkey online. And boy, does he make some cracking detective games. I would highly recommend them, particularly if you're fans of any of the kind of inspirational games to him that we had mentioned. Return of the Obra Dinn, Case of the Golden Idol are probably, and Root Trees Are Dead are probably the three most famous ones there, but Immortality was huge, even though it was a little bit less of a detective game. And of course, Type Help was also a very strong entry in the genre. So Willy is taking those games and making new ones that fans of the genre will love. So definitely go check them out. They're totally free. So, I mean, it is a recommendation that I feel absolutely zero. it's a win for everyone because Willy just wants you to play the games he's passionate about making. You don't have to pay a cent and you get some awesome fun out of it. So I'm especially looking forward to checking out Green Mist Over Portland, which is the sequel to Red Pearls of Borneo. But Red Pearls is out on Steam and itch right now, and it is a certified banger. So go check it out, particularly if you like these kinds of detective games. And I mean, for the spiel this week, I'll probably keep it short. There are a couple of things I wanted to mention. So one is the history book that I talked about that I probably bored Willy with in the interview. It is called Red Dead's History of Video Game and Obsession in America's Violent Past. It's by historian, PhD professor Tori C. Olson, and it basically traces American history while using kind of Red Dead 2 as a just a kind of loose roadmap and talking about, well, you know, the time period is off, but this was exactly right. This was a trope. This was not. And not only, I think, is it particularly important for folks like Willy said who are playing games or reading fiction and getting their main dose of history from those things, it's really important to hear an actual historian discuss how that can be helpful and how that can be damaging. But also just as someone, even if you don't like games, even if you are someone just interested in American history, it's a super poignant account of the violence in the U.S. and how it was greatly shaped by these forces that were going on in the period between the Civil War and Reconstruction. So if you have any interest at all in learning about that, I didn't realize how much of an interest I had in the topic until I started reading this book, and it has really captured my attention. I'm actually probably just going to read more history not related to Red Dead or video games because of this book, so would highly recommend it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And then the other plug I have is just if you have not played any of these mystery games that have inspired Willy, I would highly recommend them. I haven't talked about them as much on this show since I'm mainly plugging lesser known titles, and these are all somewhat big. But Return of the Obra Dinn is a foundational game for me. The Case of the Golden Idol was some of the best, 4 or 5 hours I've had playing a game, and The Root Trees Are Dead is also very solid, although I like it less than those other two entries. So yeah, go check those out if you haven't, although they probably don't need a show notes plug since they are so famous and popular. Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed the show and you want to help me support it, just tell one friend. You can search Indie Game Garden on YouTube, Instagram, and we're there. You can find me on Blue Sky, Darth Malks, and send me an email if you want to chat at indiegamegarden@gmail.com. I love you, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.